The ballroom went silent the moment Eliza Davenport crossed the polished marble floor and sat on Cyrus St. John's lap. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. No one had ever approached the King of Galveston's underworld uninvited, much less during the sacred prenuptial signing ceremony. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to dim in response to the collective shock, casting amber shadows across the faces of the gathered elite: shipping magnates, corrupt officials, cartel representatives. Eliza felt every pair of eyes boring into her back, but she kept her spine straight, her chin lifted even as her hands trembled against the crimson silk of her evening gown. Her fiancé, Pedro Mendez, stood frozen across the ceremonial table, his mouth curved in that same cold smile. The smile he wore the night he cut the brake lines on Tarian's truck and watched her twin brother's body pulled from Galveston Bay. The memory of it made bile rise in Eliza's throat. She could still hear the screech of metal on asphalt, still see the way Pedro had stood on the dock with such casual indifference as the divers brought Tarian's lifeless form to the surface, as if he'd just closed a business deal rather than ended a life. Eliza's voice trembled, but her defiance didn't. By the old Galveston Compact, I claim sanctuary under the protection of Cyrus St. John. The ancient words hung in the air like a challenge. Several attorneys rose from their seats, their protests already forming on their lips. But Cyrus, the man who had ruled Galveston's underworld for 2 decades without mercy, without warmth, without a single moment of visible weakness, merely shifted beneath her, one powerful arm curving around her waist with deliberate slowness. His chest was solid against her back, radiating a heat that felt almost dangerous. His black cowboy hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen everything the Gulf Coast darkness had to offer. Eliza forced herself not to flinch, not to show the fear that clawed at her insides. She'd gambled everything on this moment, on the ancient laws that even the Mendez cartel couldn't entirely ignore. His voice was low, meant only for her, a southern drawl that carried the weight of absolute authority. "I won't let him touch you." And that was how the war began. Hello, lovely listeners. Before we dive deeper into this epic tale of defiance, danger, and unexpected love, I'd truly appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring you more amazing content. Now, let's jump into Eliza's world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when she makes the boldest move of her life. Every daughter born to a legacy shipping family had one fate: to be married for strategic advantage. Eliza Davenport had spent her entire life preparing for the moment when her family's company would require a merger, when the board of directors would reveal her arranged match in front of Galveston's entire business elite. She'd imagined it 1,000 different ways, some pragmatic, some hopeful, all of them ending with her accepting her duty with grace and dignity, as her mother had, as her grandmother had, as every woman in her bloodline had done for generations. But when the merger documents had been placed before her that evening, when the boardroom doors had opened to reveal Pedro Mendez of the Mendez import and export empire, her heart didn't flutter with nervous anticipation. It turned to ice. He was powerful. That much was undeniable. His cartel controlled half the Gulf Coast smuggling routes. His political connections reached all the way to the state capital. Handsome, too, in the way that dangerous things often were, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. The society women at charity galas had sighed when he entered rooms, their admiration palpable. Eliza had wanted to scream. The board had descended upon her immediately after the announcement, their faces glowing with satisfaction. Her father, Marcus Davenport, his hair now more silver than black, had clasped her shoulder with what he probably thought was paternal reassurance. "A necessary alliance, sweetheart. The Mendez connections will save the company. Your children will inherit an empire." Children. With the man who had murdered her twin. Eliza had smiled through numb lips, nodded at the appropriate moments, accepted the congratulations that felt like condolences. Across the boardroom, Pedro had watched her with those dark eyes, and she'd seen the satisfaction there, the knowing he'd gotten away with it. Tarian's death had been ruled an accident during a late-night inspection at the dockyards, a tragic loss when his truck went off the pier road. Never mind that her brother's vehicle had been meticulously maintained. Never mind that 3 dock workers had mysteriously changed their testimonies overnight. Never mind that the Mendez family had gained control of the most strategic waterfront contracts within a week of Tarian's funeral. The merger contract on the mahogany table seemed to pulse with finality, as if fate itself was insisting on this union. Eliza had pressed her hand against her brother's silver compass, the one she wore around her neck always, feeling the cold metal against her palm, and understood with terrible clarity that she had 2 choices: submit to a marriage that would bind her to her brother's killer for life, or defy her family's expectations and face financial ruin, social exile, or worse. The law was clear. To resist a corporate merger was to bankrupt your family. To invite destruction upon everyone who depended on Davenport seafood and shipping. Daughters who refused strategic marriages were cut off, their families stripped of business relationships and protection. Most didn't survive in Galveston's cutthroat shipping world. But Eliza had never been particularly good at accepting impossible situations. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights researching every dusty legal document in the Port Authority archives, every obscure maritime law she could access through sympathetic historians at the Rosenberg Library. The answer, when she found it, was so dangerous that she'd laughed until tears streamed down her face. There was one law older than corporate mergers, one power that superseded even family obligations: the right of sanctuary under the Galveston Compact. It was ancient, barely remembered, a relic from the days when the city had been ruled by pirates and smugglers, Jean Lafitte's legacy written into the original port charter. Any citizen could appeal directly to the recognized authority of Galveston for protection, pledging themselves to that authority's service in exchange for absolute shield against all enemies, including arranged marriages. The catch, of course, was that the authority had to accept. And Cyrus St. John, the undisputed king of Galveston's underworld, hadn't granted sanctuary to anyone in over 15 years. Still, Eliza had no other options. So she put on her finest gown, crimson silk that matched the defiance burning in her chest, with a neckline that commanded respect, and made her way to the sanctum on the night of the final prenuptial signing ceremony, where the merger would be officially sealed before Galveston's entire power structure. She'd planned to approach Cyrus formally, to make her petition with proper legal language and documentation. But then she'd seen Pedro enter from the opposite doors, his tailored suit immaculate, and she'd caught it, the faint scent of motor oil and salt water, the same smell that had clung to Tarian's truck the night it was sabotaged. Her body had moved before her mind could catch up, instinct overriding 3 generations of Davenport propriety. She'd walked straight across that ballroom floor, past the shocked attorneys and scandalized board members, past her own parents' horrified faces, and sat directly on the lap of the most dangerous man in Texas. And when Cyrus's arm had curved around her waist, when his voice had rumbled that promise against her ear, "I won't let him touch you," Eliza Davenport had known with absolute certainty that she just traded one kind of cage for another. But this cage had teeth. And this time, she'd chosen it herself. 6 months earlier, Eliza had been reviewing shipping manifests in her office when her phone rang at 2:47 a.m. The kind of call that splits your life into before and after. "There's been an accident at the dockyards, Miss Davenport. Your brother." She'd driven to the pier with her heart in her throat, still wearing her reading glasses and the oversized sweater she'd thrown over her pajamas. The flashing red and blue lights painted the foggy night in strobing colors. Police cruisers. An ambulance. The industrial cranes looming overhead like silent witnesses. Tarian's truck had gone straight through the guardrail and into the black water below. They'd pulled him out 20 minutes before she arrived, but Eliza had seen the divers' faces. They'd known it was already too late. Mechanical failure, Officer Dwight Kane had said, his notepad already closed. Brake line gave out on the turn. Happened sometimes with these old access roads. Real tragedy, Miss Davenport. Your brother was a good man. But Eliza had looked past Kane's shoulder and seen it, a black Mercedes sedan parked in the shadows near the far warehouse, engine still running, exhaust visible in the cold air. She'd recognized the distinctive chrome detailing on the grille. Pedro Mendez's personal vehicle. She'd opened her mouth to say something, but Kane had already turned away, already moving to clear the scene. When she'd looked back toward the warehouse, the Mercedes was gone, disappeared into the maze of shipping containers like it had never been there at all. The funeral was held 4 days later under gray skies that perfectly matched the hollow feeling in Eliza's chest. She'd stood beside the grave holding the silver compass Terrian had always carried, their grandfathers, passed down through generations of Davenport men, and tried to understand how the world kept turning when her twin brother was being lowered into the ground. Pedro Mendez had attended, naturally. He'd approached her parents with appropriate condolences, his expression perfectly calibrated to convey sympathy without presumption. Eliza had watched him shake her father's hand, and she'd seen it, the briefest flicker of satisfaction behind those dark eyes. 2 weeks later, the Mendez family had made their merger proposal official. Marcus Davenport had called an emergency board meeting. Eliza had sat in the back of the conference room, still wearing black, still numb, while her father explained the situation with the careful tone of a man trying to convince himself. Davenport Seafood and Shipping is hemorrhaging money. The new EPA regulations, the shipping route complications, Terrian's loss. We don't have an heir anymore. The Mendez proposal offers full operational support, political connections, capital investment. It's comprehensive. It's a takeover, Eliza had said quietly. Her father had looked at her with exhausted eyes. It's survival. The terms were straightforward, a complete merger of operations, with the Mendez family holding controlling interest. The final component, a unifying gesture as the lawyers called it, would be a marriage between Eliza Davenport and Pedro Mendez. 2 families joined, 2 legacies combined, the whole arrangement sealed with a wedding that would make it legally unbreakable. Her mother, Charlotte, had taken her aside after the meeting, gripping her hands with desperate strength. I know this isn't what you wanted, sweetheart. I know it's not fair. But we're losing everything. The company your great-grandfather built, the waterfront properties, the contracts, it's all slipping away. This marriage, it saves us. It saves all the families who work for us. Sometimes we have to sacrifice what we want for the greater good. Eliza had wanted to scream that Terrian had been sacrificed already. That his accident was too convenient, too perfectly timed with the Mendez family's acquisition plans. But when she tried to voice her suspicions, her parents had looked at her with the kind of pity reserved for people consumed by grief-fueled paranoia. Pedro is a successful businessman, her father had said gently. I know you're hurting, and I know you want someone to blame, but these conspiracy theories aren't healthy. The dock workers who'd been on shift that night had all suddenly developed amnesia. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. The police had closed the case with bureaucratic finality. Eliza had been trapped, grief and rage churning inside her with nowhere to go. She'd started spending her sleepless nights in the Rosenberg Library, pulling dusty legal texts and historical documents, searching for something, anything, that might give her leverage. Galveston's history was written in salt and blood, layers of maritime law and pirate legacy buried beneath modern shipping regulations. That's when she found it, tucked into a footnote in a century-old Port Authority record, the Galveston Compact. Jean Lafitte's original agreement with the city's founding families, granting sanctuary rights to any citizen who pledged service to the recognized authority of the port. It had never been officially repealed, just forgotten. And everyone in Galveston knew who the real authority was. Not the mayor, not the police chief, not the port commissioners who took bribes and looked the other way. Cyrus St. John, the man who owned the sanctum, the silent king who controlled everything that mattered. Eliza had copied the legal text with shaking hands, understanding exactly what it meant. One last desperate gamble. One chance to escape the cage closing around her. She just had to be brave enough, or reckless enough, to take it. The ballroom had erupted into chaos after Eliza's declaration, but Cyrus had simply stood, lifting her with him as easily as if she weighed nothing. His hand had remained possessive at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, past Pedro's frozen rage and her parents' horrified faces, toward the private elevator that led to his office above the sanctum. The doors had barely closed before Wallace appeared, Cyrus's attorney, a silver-haired man in an immaculate three-piece suit who moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. He'd had the documents ready within 20 minutes, spread across Cyrus's massive oak desk like a battle plan. The Galveston Compact is legally binding, Wallace had explained, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Established 1817, never repealed, and precedent in 3 separate Texas court cases. Miss Davenport's invocation is valid. The prenuptial contract with the Mendez family is hereby void. Eliza had stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the club below, watching the crowd scatter like disturbed ants. Pedro was visible near the entrance, surrounded by his attorneys, his face dark with fury. "The terms," Cyrus had said, his voice drawing her attention back to the office. He'd removed his cowboy hat, revealing close-cropped hair and a face that belonged on old wanted posters, all sharp angles and calculated danger. He'd poured 2 glasses of whiskey neat, and slid one across the desk toward her. "You claimed sanctuary. I accepted. That makes you mine now, Miss Davenport. Under my protection, but also under my authority." "Explain," Eliza had said, forcing her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Wallace had gestured to the documents. "You will serve as Mr. St. John's legal proxy in all port authority matters. As the Davenport heir, you hold significant voting rights on waterfront development, shipping regulations, and contract approvals. Those rights now extend to Mr. St. John through your sanctuary bond. You will attend all relevant meetings, cast votes according to his direction, and provide him full access to Davenport seafood and shipping strategic decisions." The whiskey had burned going down, but not as much as the realization of what she'd done. "You need my company's influence." "I need legitimacy," Cyrus had corrected, leaning against his desk with casual authority. "I've spent 20 years building an empire in the shadows. Time to bring it into the light. Your family's name opens doors that my reputation keeps closed. In exchange, Pedro Mendez will never touch you. Neither will anyone else who means you harm. You'll live here, under my protection. My security becomes your security. My enemies become your enemies." "And if I refuse the terms?" His smile had been cold. "You already accepted them the moment you sat on my lap downstairs. Sanctuary isn't negotiable, Miss Davenport. You invoked ancient law. That law binds us both now." The sound of raised voices had echoed from below. Eliza had moved back to the windows and seen Pedro forcing his way past security, his attorney trailing behind making threats about lawsuits and legal action. He'd stormed into the sanctum's main floor, pointing up toward the office, his voice carrying even through the glass. Cyrus had pressed a button on his desk. "Troy, we have an uninvited guest." Within seconds, 3 of Cyrus's security team had materialized around Pedro, large men in dark suits who moved with military precision. Pedro had tried to resist, shouting about stolen property and breached contracts, but Troy, the head of security, had simply gripped his arm with the kind of pressure that promised broken bones if he didn't comply. Eliza had watched as they'd escorted Pedro out through the main entrance, his threats of revenge echoing across the ballroom even as the doors closed behind him. Several of his attorneys had followed, already making phone calls, already preparing for legal war. "He'll retaliate," Eliza had said quietly. "Let him try." Cyrus had appeared beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and whiskey. "The Mendez family operates on fear and corruption. I operate on control and consequence. There's a difference." Wallace had cleared his throat diplomatically. "The documents require signatures, Miss Davenport. Both yours and Mr. St. John's. Once executed, the sanctuary bond is permanent and legally unbreakable under Texas maritime law." Eliza had stared at the papers, at the blank lines waiting for her name. She'd escaped one forced marriage only to bind herself to a man just as dangerous, just as controlling. But when she'd looked at Cyrus St. John's profile, the hard set of his jaw, the calculating intelligence in his eyes, she'd understood something crucial. Pedro had killed her brother and smiled about it. Cyrus might be a cage, but he was a cage with teeth, with power, with the resources to give her what she needed most: revenge. She'd picked up the pen and signed her name in confident strokes. Cyrus had signed beneath hers, and when Wallace had witnessed the documents with a notary seal, Eliza had felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. She'd traded one killer for another. But this time, at least, she'd chosen which devil to dance with. 3 days after the sanctuary signing, Eliza found herself in Cyrus's private suite on the top floor of the sanctum, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Galveston's glittering waterfront. The city sprawled below like a kingdom waiting to be claimed, all neon lights and dark water stretching toward the Gulf. Cyrus had summoned her after midnight, when the club below was at its peak, music thrumming through the floors, money changing hands, deals being made in shadowed corners. He'd poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid gold. "You want to know why I really accepted your sanctuary claim," he'd said, skipping pleasantries entirely. He'd loosened his tie, shed his jacket, looking more human than she'd ever seen him, but no less dangerous. Eliza had settled into the leather chair across from him, cradling her glass. "I assumed you'd tell me when you were ready." Smart woman. He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. "The truth is, Miss Davenport, when you walked across that ballroom and sat on my lap, you handed me the one thing I've been trying to acquire for 5 years: legitimate power." He'd stood then, moving to the windows with the restless energy of a man accustomed to controlling everything in his line of sight. "I've spent 2 decades building an empire in the shadows. Clubs, real estate, construction contracts, shipping routes, all of it operating in the gray spaces where the law doesn't quite reach. But gray empires don't last. They get swallowed by cartels like the Mendez family or crushed by federal task forces looking to make examples." "So you want to go legitimate," Eliza had said, understanding dawning. "I want to survive." He turned back to face her, his expression carved from granite. "The Port Commission controls everything that matters in this city: development rights, shipping contracts, waterfront access, regulatory oversight. 5 votes decide it all. The Mendez family currently controls 2 through bribed commissioners. I control 1 through a proxy. The remaining 2 belong to legacy families who won't deal with anyone carrying my reputation. But they'll deal with a Davenport." "Exactly." Cyrus had returned to his desk, pulling out architectural plans and financial documents, spreading them across the surface with practiced efficiency. I've been quietly acquiring legitimate businesses for years. Construction companies, security firms, commercial real estate. All legal, all taxed, all documented. But without port commission influence, I can't secure the contracts that make those businesses profitable. The Mendez cartel is expanding their drug-running operations through the waterfront, and they're doing it by controlling the very board that's supposed to regulate them. Eliza had studied the documents, LLC registrations, business licenses, architectural renderings for waterfront development projects. It was impressive, meticulous, the work of someone planning an exit strategy from a world that rarely granted clean escapes. You need Davenport Seafood's voting authority to block them, she'd said slowly, and to push through your own projects. I need your family's legacy influence to legitimize mine. He'd met her eyes directly, no pretense of charm or manipulation. 3 generations of Davenport reputation opens doors that 20 years of mine keeps permanently closed. With your proxy votes and your family name attached to my business ventures, I can finally step out of the shadows. Build something that doesn't require enforcers and offshore accounts. Something I can leave behind that isn't written in blood. The honesty had been startling. Eliza had expected many things from Cyrus St. John: threats, demands, cold calculation. Not vulnerability. Not this glimpse of a man trying to outrun his own past. You used me, she'd said, though without heat. In his position, she might have done the same. I seized an opportunity, he'd corrected. You gave me leverage I couldn't have bought or taken by force. But make no mistake, Miss Davenport, my protection is real. The Mendez family will come for you, and when they do, they'll find a wall they can't breach. Eliza had stood then, moving to stand beside him at the window, watching the ships move through the harbor like chess pieces on a board. I have a condition. I'm listening, Cyrus replied. You want to use my family's influence to destroy the Mendez cartel's grip on this city. I want you to help me prove Pedro murdered my brother. She turned to face him directly, letting him see the rage that had been burning in her chest for 6 months. Tarian's death wasn't an accident. I saw Pedro's car at the dockyard that night. I know he sabotaged that truck. But the police are in his pocket, the witnesses have been silenced, and my family thinks I'm delusional with grief. Cyrus had studied her for a long moment, those calculating eyes reading every angle of her face. Proof like that is dangerous. If Pedro killed your brother to accelerate a corporate takeover, he won't hesitate to kill again to protect that secret. And if we expose him, it won't just be a legal battle. The Mendez cartel will come at us with everything they have: lawyers, enforcers, corrupt officials. It'll be war. Good. Eliza's voice had been steel wrapped in silk. Because I don't just want justice, Mr. St. John. I want to bury him. I want to take everything he stole, my brother's life, my family's company, my future, and burn it all down around him. Silence had stretched between them, heavy with the weight of shared purpose. Then Cyrus had extended his hand, his expression shifting into something almost like respect. We'll bury him together, he'd said quietly. But understand this, once we start, there's no turning back. You'll have his blood on your hands, just as much as mine. Eliza had taken his hand, feeling the rough calluses that spoke of a past he'd spent years trying to escape. Then I guess we're both going to hell, Mr. St. John. His smile had been sharp as broken glass. Call me Cyrus. If we're going to war together, might as well dispense with formalities. She'd raised her whiskey glass as they toasted to their sealed alliance. Eliza's new life began with a key card and a warning. "The penthouse is yours," Cyrus had said, handing her the slim black card that accessed the private elevator. "But the club operates 24 hours. You'll hear things, see things. People come to the sanctum because it's neutral ground. Politicians making deals they can't make in daylight, businessmen settling disputes without courtrooms, transactions that require discretion. You don't ask questions, you don't repeat what you hear, and you never, ever interfere." She'd nodded, understanding the rules of her gilded cage. The penthouse itself was stunning. 3,000 square feet of exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, decorated with an unexpected combination of modern minimalism and southern antiques. A 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a plantation house. A kitchen with marble countertops she'd never use. A closet that Wallace had somehow already filled with an entire wardrobe in her exact size, every piece chosen with impeccable taste. But it was the view that truly captured her, the entire Galveston waterfront spreading below like a map of everything she'd lost and everything she was fighting to reclaim. From this height, she could see Davenport seafood and shipping docks, the warehouses that had been in her family for generations, the stretch of coastline where Terrian had died. She'd stood at those windows every morning for the first week, drinking coffee and watching the ships come in, feeling like a queen surveying a kingdom she no longer ruled. The Port Authority meetings began on Monday. Cyrus had picked her up personally, dressed in a charcoal suit that transformed him from nightclub owner to business magnate with disturbing ease. In the car, a black Mercedes with bulletproof windows, he'd briefed her with clinical efficiency. "Commissioner Wilkins will propose extending the Mendez shipping contracts. You'll vote no. Commissioner Lois Brennan will suggest new environmental regulations that would delay my construction project on Pier 19. You'll abstain. When the harbor expansion comes up, you'll propose an amendment requiring additional oversight. That's where we start building our coalition." Eliza had studied the documents he'd provided, impressed despite herself by the level of detail. Every commissioner's voting history, their financial interests, their vulnerabilities. Cyrus didn't just play chess. He knew every piece on the board before the game even started. The meeting itself had been a masterclass in power dynamics. Cyrus hadn't spoken much, but his presence had dominated the room. When Commissioner Wilkins had tried to push the Mendez contract through with minimal discussion, Cyrus had simply looked at him, a cold, assessing stare that carried the weight of every secret he undoubtedly knew about the man. Wilkins had stammered, amended his proposal, and suddenly found 3 other commissioners agreeing that perhaps the contract needed additional review. Eliza had cast her votes exactly as instructed, and watched the political landscape shift like sand. Afterward, Commissioner Brennan had approached them in the parking lot, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd built her career on waterfront development. "Cyrus. Miss Davenport. Interesting alliance you've formed." "Progress requires adaptation, Lois," Cyrus had said smoothly, his hand settling possessively at the small of Eliza's back, a gesture that hadn't escaped Brennan's notice. "The Mendez family won't like this. The Mendez family can file their complaints through proper channels." His smile had been knife-sharp. "Or they can try more direct approaches. Either way, I'm prepared." That night, Eliza had watched the sanctum operate from the upstairs gallery that overlooked the main floor. A judge had arrived at 10, disappearing into one of the private rooms with Wallace and a briefcase full of documents. At 11, a city councilman had met with Cyrus at his preferred corner booth, their conversation lasting exactly 12 minutes before ending with a handshake and an envelope exchanged beneath the table. At midnight, a shipping company executive she recognized from her father's business dinners had sought an audience, leaving 20 minutes later looking significantly relieved. The sanctum wasn't just a nightclub. It was a courthouse, a bank, a confessional, and a throne room all wrapped in velvet and neon. and Cyrus St. John was its undisputed king. She'd started to notice things about him, small details that cracked the facade of the cold, calculating kingpin. The way he never drank more than 2 glasses of whiskey, maintaining control even when everyone around him descended into looseness. How he remembered every employee's name, asked after their families, paid for a bartender's mother's surgery without being asked. The discipline of someone who'd clawed his way up from nothing and refused to slip back down. Late one evening, she'd found him alone in his office, studying architectural plans with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He'd looked up when she entered, and for just a moment, she'd seen something unguarded in his expression. Exhaustion, maybe, or loneliness. "Can't sleep either?" he'd asked, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Too quiet up there. Strange, considering there's a nightclub directly below me." His laugh had been unexpected, almost genuine. You get used to it. Eventually, the silence becomes louder than the noise. They talked until 3 in the morning, about Galveston's history, about the weight of legacy, about what it meant to inherit something you never asked for. He told her about buying the Sanctum 15 years ago, when it was a dying dive bar, transforming it into the city's true center of power through sheer will and strategic vision. She told him about growing up as Tarian's twin, always feeling like the spare heir, the insurance policy. How her brother's death had simultaneously freed her and destroyed her. "You're not a spare anything," Cyrus had said quietly, his eyes holding hers across the desk. "You're the most dangerous piece on the board now, Eliza. You just don't realize it yet." The way he'd said her name, not Miss Davenport but Eliza, had sent heat curling through her chest that had nothing to do with the whiskey. She'd stood to leave, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had become. But Cyrus had stood too, moving around the desk with that predatory grace he carried like a second skin. His hand had caught hers, thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Sleep well," he'd said, his voice low, dangerous, full of things neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Eliza had fled to the elevator, her heart hammering, acutely aware that she was no longer sure which was more dangerous, the enemy circling outside her gilded cage, or the man who held the key. Eliza found him at 2 in the morning, silhouetted against the office windows with a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk beside him. Not the expensive crystal decanter he usually poured from, but a plain bottle of Maker's Mark, the kind of whiskey you drank when you wanted to forget, not impress. Cyrus didn't turn when she entered, just kept staring at the photograph in his hands, his shoulders carrying a weight she'd never seen before. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual, touched by liquor and something darker. "So should you." Eliza moved closer, drawn by the rare vulnerability radiating from him like heat from a wound. "What are you looking at?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he held out the photograph, a faded picture of 2 young men, barely out of their teens, arms slung around each other's shoulders. One was unmistakably Cyrus, younger, leaner, with less hardness in his eyes. The other looked so much like him they could have been twins. "Devante," Cyrus said quietly. "My baby brother. He'd be 32 this week." Would be. Past tense wrapped around a present grief. Eliza took the photograph, studying the joy captured in that frozen moment. 2 brothers who looked like they owned the world and couldn't imagine it taking anything from them. What happened? Cyrus poured another measure of whiskey, drank it in one swallow. "I happened. I was 25, running security for the East Side cruise, making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Devante was 19, working 2 jobs trying to save for college. He wanted to be a teacher, if you can believe that. But he saw what I was making, saw how people respected, feared me, and he wanted in." He refilled his glass but didn't drink, just stared into the amber liquid like it held answers. "I should have told him no." Should have kept him far away from that world. But I was arrogant, thought I could protect him, teach him the game. So I brought him in. Started him small, collections, deliveries, nothing dangerous. Except everything in that world is dangerous, and I was too stupid to see it. Eliza settled into the chair across from him, recognizing the particular shape of guilt that came from surviving someone you loved. There was a war. The Southside gangs wanted our territory, wanted to prove they were the new power in Galveston. They sent a message by hitting our youngest members, the ones who hadn't earned their protection yet. His jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. Devante was making a delivery to one of our warehouses. Wrong place, wrong night. They shot him 12 times and left him in the street like garbage. The brutality of it hung in the air between them, sharp-edged and unforgiving. I found him, Cyrus continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Still warm. Still wearing the jacket I'd bought him for his birthday 2 months earlier. He died because I thought I could make him invincible by bringing him into my world. But all I did was paint a target on his back. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes, not just for Devante, but for Tarion, for every brother stolen too young, for every survivor left carrying that impossible weight. Is that why you built all this? The sanctum, the empire, the control over every corner of this city. I swore on his grave that no one would ever control Galveston the way those gangs did. That I'd be powerful enough, ruthless enough, strategic enough that no one could touch what was mine. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating in its nakedness. 10 years, Eliza. 10 years of building an empire so I could convince myself his death meant something. But some nights, like tonight, I just see that kid who wanted to be a teacher, and I know I'm the reason he never got the chance. Eliza moved without thinking, crossing to where he sat and taking the whiskey glass from his hand, setting it aside. She knelt beside his chair, taking his face in her hands the way you'd handle something precious and broken. Tarion wanted to be a maritime engineer, she said softly. He loved those ships more than anything. Used to talk about designing vessels that could withstand any storm, any condition. Safe ships that would bring everyone home. Her voice cracked. The night he died, he'd called me. Said he wanted to show me something at the docks, some design flaw he'd noticed in one of our older vessels. I was tired, told him it could wait until morning. If I'd just gone with him. Don't. Cyrus's hands covered hers, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Don't do that to yourself. You didn't kill your brother. Pedro did. And you didn't kill Devante. Those gang members did. She held his gaze, willing him to accept the same grace he was offering her. We're both carrying ghosts that aren't ours to carry, Cyrus. But maybe we can carry them together. Make them lighter. Something shifted in his expression, the walls he kept so carefully maintained crumbling just enough to let her see the man beneath the legend. Lonely, haunted, desperately trying to atone for a sin that had never been his to begin with. I miss him every day, Cyrus admitted, his voice breaking on the words. Every decision I make, every move I plan, I wonder what he'd think. If he'd be proud or disgusted. If he'd understand why I became this. I miss Tarion the same way. Twin bond, it's like missing a part of yourself that you'll never get back. Eliza's tears fell freely now, years of grief finally finding a safe place to land. I see his face every time I close my eyes. Hear his laugh in empty rooms. And the worst part is knowing that Pedro took that from me deliberately, calculatedly, for money and power. Cyrus pulled her up and into his arms, and suddenly they were holding each other with the desperate intensity of two people drowning in the same dark water. his face buried in her hair, her hands fisted in his shirt, both of them trembling with the weight of shared loss. "We'll make them pay," Cyrus whispered against her temple. "Every person who took our brothers from us. We'll burn their empires to ash and build something better from the ruins. I swear it, Eliza." "Together," she breathed back, and felt him nod. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had changed between them. The transaction had evolved into partnership. The alliance had deepened into something neither of them had words for yet, something built on shared scars and mutual understanding that you couldn't fake or force. Cyrus's thumb traced her jawline with unexpected tenderness. "You should sleep. Tomorrow we have war to wage." But neither of them moved. They stayed there in the darkness, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, finding unexpected solace in the only person who truly understood the particular shape of their grief. For the first time since Tarion died, Eliza didn't feel completely alone. And judging by the way Cyrus held her, like she was something precious he was afraid might disappear, she suspected he felt the same. "I'm getting emotional here. Smash that like button and comment your vibe right now. Are you feeling vengeful, heartbroken, or protective? Drop the emoji that fits you best, because this story is about to take an even darker turn. Pedro Mendez is about to discover what happens when you corner two people with nothing left to lose. Trust me, you won't be ready for what comes next." Cyrus arrived at the sanctum 3 days later with a manila folder thick enough to bury a man. Eliza and Cyrus met him in the private office, the morning sun streaming through the windows casting long shadows across the desk where Cyrus spread his findings like a prosecutor laying out a case. "Found your smoking gun," Cyrus said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered dangerous prey. He was Cyrus's best investigator, former FBI, forced out for refusing to look the other way on a corruption case, now using those same skills to dig up truths that powerful people wanted buried. Took some doing, but the evidence is solid. He pulled out the first document, maintenance records from Davenport Seafood and Shipping's motor pool. Tarion Davenport's truck was serviced 2 days before his death. Full inspection, brake system completely overhauled. Master mechanic signed off on it, vehicle was in perfect condition. Eliza's hands trembled as she took the paperwork, seeing her brother's truck number, the date, the mechanic's signature confirming everything was operational. "The police report claimed mechanical failure," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "It says the brake lines were corroded, that it was inevitable." Police report was fabricated. Cyrus pulled out a second set of documents, the official accident investigation, marked with Police Chief Dwight Kane's signature. "I tracked down the actual investigating officer, Martin Hayes. He's a dock worker now, demoted and reassigned 6 months ago, right after your brother's death. Took 3 meetings and a promise of protection to get him to talk." Cyrus leaned forward, his expression carved from stone. What did he see? Everything. Cyrus pulled out a flash drive, plugged it into Cyrus's laptop. Security footage flickered to life, grainy, time-stamped, damning. "This is from a private camera on Warehouse 7, the one the police conveniently never checked. Watch the bottom right corner." They watched in silence as the timestamp showed 1:47 a.m., the night Tarion died. A black Mercedes sedan pulled into frame, distinctive chrome detailing catching the security lights. It parked near the dock road access, and a figure emerged, tall, well-dressed, unmistakably Pedro Mendez. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The footage showed Pedro approaching Tarion's parked truck, looking around to ensure he was alone, then crouching near the front wheel well. He worked for less than 3 minutes, quick, efficient, practiced. Then he stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and walked back to his Mercedes. The timestamp showed 1:52 a.m. Tarian's accident had been reported at 2:14 a.m., 22 minutes later. He cut the brake lines, Eliza whispered, her vision blurring with tears of rage. Right there on camera. He murdered my brother, and the police buried it. Martin Hayes was the first responder, Cyrus continued. He pulled this footage immediately, brought it to Chief Kane. Kane told him the investigation was being handled at a higher level, took the evidence, and within a week, Martin was demoted to dock security with a strong suggestion that he forget what he saw if he wanted to keep his pension. Cyrus's hand found Eliza's, squeezing tight. Where's Martin now? In a safe house in Texas City. Under my protection. Cyrus pulled out more documents, financial records, phone logs, witness statements. But here's the problem, Martin's terrified. The Mendez family has reach, and Chief Kane is buried so deep in their pockets he might as well be on their payroll. Martin saw what happened to the two other officers who questioned the official story. One transferred to Border Patrol in El Paso, the other resigned suddenly after his daughter's college admission was mysteriously revoked. They can't touch him if we move fast, Cyrus said, his voice cold with calculation. We take this to federal authorities. Bypass the local corruption entirely. RICO statutes, murder charges, the whole package. That's the play, Cyrus agreed. But we need Martin to testify, and right now he's one strong breeze away from disappearing entirely. He's got a wife, 2 kids, aging parents. The Mendez family's specialty is leveraging families. Eliza stood, pacing to the windows, staring out at the waterfront where her brother had died. How long before Pedro knows we have this? He already knows something's moving. Cyrus pulled up news articles on the laptop. Check the headlines from the past 48 hours. The articles painted a coordinated attack. Davenport heiress abandons family legacy for underworld alliance. Questions raised about Eliza Davenport's mental stability following brother's death. Sources suggest grief-driven breakdown led to sanctum scandal. Smear campaign, Cyrus said flatly. Classic Mendez tactic. Destroy credibility before the accusations can land. It gets worse. Cyrus showed them internal company emails. Anonymous tips sent to Davenport employees suggesting layoffs were coming, that the company was being stripped for parts. 3 long-time shipping clients had suddenly canceled contracts, citing concerns about leadership stability. 2 warehouse managers had received threatening phone calls warning them to distance themselves from Eliza. He's trying to isolate you, Cyrus observed, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. Cut you off from your company, your employees, your support system. Make you look unstable so that when you accuse him of murder, nobody believes you. Eliza turned back to face them, and something fierce burned in her eyes, the same determination Cyrus had seen the night she'd claimed sanctuary. Then we hit him harder. What do we have on Pedro beyond the murder? Cyrus smiled, sharp and predatory. Oh, I saved the best for last. He pulled out a thick folder marked with a DEA seal. Remember how the Mendez family expanded their shipping operations right after Tarian's death? I've been tracking their cargo manifests. Cross-referenced them with Coast Guard drug seizure reports. 3 shipments in the past 5 months with matching container numbers, drugs hidden in legitimate seafood imports, all traced back to Mendez import and export. Cyrus took the documents, scanning them with the focused intensity of a predator finding a weakness in its prey. This connects Pedro directly to cartel operations. Federal charges, asset forfeiture, the whole organization comes down. He's been using the Davenport merger to gain cover, Cyrus explained. Once he married Eliza, he'd have legitimate access to Davenport shipping routes, making it nearly impossible to track which shipments were clean and which were dirty. He killed Tyrion to eliminate oversight and secure a legal shield through marriage. The full scope of Pedro's plan crystallized in Eliza's mind. Her brother murdered, her life hijacked, her family's century-old legacy about to be transformed into criminal infrastructure. The cold calculation of it stole her breath. "We need to move fast," Cyrus said, already pulling out his phone. "Wallace can coordinate with the federal prosecutors. We'll need witness protection for Martin and his family, immunity deals, the full package." "But Eliza," he turned to face her directly. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Pedro will know you're coming for him, and he'll retaliate with everything he has." "Let him come," Eliza said, her voice steel-wrapped in silk. "I've got the King of Galveston standing between him and me. And I've got evidence that will put him in federal prison for the rest of his life." Cyrus gathered his documents, but hesitated at the door. "One more thing you should know. Chief Kane increased his personal security detail yesterday. And Pedro's been meeting with his cartel contacts, the serious ones from Matamoros. Whatever they're planning, it's big." After Cyrus left, Eliza and Cyrus stood together at the windows, watching the sun climb higher over the waterfront. The city sprawled below them, beautiful and brutal, a chessboard where every move carried the weight of lives and legacies. "He killed my brother to steal my family's company," Eliza said quietly. "Used my grief as a weapon, tried to force me into a marriage that would legitimize his criminal empire. And when I escaped, he tried to destroy my reputation, my company, everything I have left of Tyrion's legacy." Cyrus moved behind her, his hand settling on her shoulders with possessive certainty. "We're going to destroy him, Eliza. Systematically, legally, completely. He'll lose his freedom, his empire, his family name. Everything he took from you, we'll take from him tenfold." She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When do we move?" "Tonight. Wallace will file the federal complaints first thing tomorrow morning. By the time Pedro realizes what's happening, Martin will be in federal protection and the evidence will be in the prosecutor's hands." His arms encircled her waist, protective and possessive. "But tonight, he'll make his move. He has to. It's his last chance before the net closes." "You think he'll come here? To the sanctum?" "I'm counting on it." Cyrus's voice carried the cold promise of violence barely restrained. "Let him come. Let him try to take what's mine. He'll learn the difference between corruption and control, between buying power and earning it." Eliza turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become so much more than a strategic alliance. "Thank you. For believing me when my own family wouldn't. For helping me find the truth." "You gave me the key to the kingdom," Cyrus said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. "The least I can do is help you bury the man who stole yours." She reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, seeing past the legend to the lonely man beneath, the one who understood loss, who carried his own ghosts, who'd built an empire on the foundation of never letting anyone he cared about be vulnerable again. "Somewhere between sanctuary and revenge," she whispered, "this stopped being just business." "Yeah," Cyrus agreed, his forehead touching hers. "It did." The moment hung between them, charged with everything they weren't saying, the partnership evolving into something neither of them had planned for, the protective instinct transforming into something far more dangerous. But before either could cross that final line, Cyrus's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression hardened into something brutal. Troy just reported. Pedro's Mercedes was spotted 3 blocks away. "He's coming." Cyrus released her, transformation immediate, from tender to tactical in a heartbeat. Get upstairs. Lock the penthouse door. Don't come out until I call you. Cyrus. Now, Eliza. His voice carried absolute authority, the King of Galveston issuing a command that allowed no argument. He wants to rattle you, threaten you, make you feel hunted. I won't give him that satisfaction. You stay safe while I remind Pedro Mendez exactly who controls this city. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him and face her brother's killer together. But she saw the cold calculation in Cyrus's eyes, the predator preparing to defend his territory, and understood that this was his domain, his rules, his war. She went. But from the penthouse windows high above, she watched Pedro's Mercedes pull up to the sanctum's entrance, watched him emerge with two of his enforcers, watched them push past security toward a confrontation that had been building since the moment she'd claimed sanctuary. And she knew with absolute certainty that tonight would determine everything, whether they'd win their war or lose everything trying. The evidence was gathered. The federal complaint was ready. The witness was protected. Now they just had to survive long enough to deliver the killing blow. The Port Authority chamber was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with tension and the humid weight of Gulf Coast summer pressing against inadequate air conditioning. Eliza sat in the front row beside Commissioner Brennan, the voting documents spread before her like battle plans, acutely aware that today's vote would permanently reshape Galveston's waterfront power structure. The measure was straightforward on paper, new oversight regulations requiring full disclosure of shipping manifests and ownership structures for all port operations. In practice, it would shine a federal spotlight directly onto Mendez import and export's carefully concealed drug-running infrastructure while simultaneously legitimizing Cyrus's business empire. One vote to simultaneously expose corruption and establish new order. Pedro sat 3 rows back, surrounded by his attorneys and cartel representatives, wearing the kind of expensive suit that powerful men chose when they wanted to project invincibility. But what set alarm bells ringing in Eliza's mind wasn't his presence, it was his confidence. He should have been worried, cornered, desperate. Instead, he looked like a man holding cards nobody else could see. The meeting began with procedural matters, tedious debate over shipping quotas and environmental impact assessments, the usual bureaucratic theater that preceded real power moves. Eliza tracked the commissioners' positions, counting votes, calculating outcomes. They had the numbers, barely, but enough. Then Commissioner Wilkins requested a recess, citing a scheduling conflict that required immediate attention. Unusual, but not unprecedented. The chamber cleared partially, people flooding into the hallway for coffee and hurried phone calls. Eliza stayed seated, reviewing her notes, until she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices. Angry shouting. The sound of breaking glass. Through the chamber windows, she could see the docks below erupting into chaos. A massive crowd, hundreds of people carrying signs, blocking access roads, their protest turning violent as they clashed with port security. Shipping containers toppled. Trucks blocked intersections. Smoke from burning pallets turned the afternoon hazy and orange. Commissioner Brennan appeared at her shoulder, her expression grim. "The timing feels coordinated," she said quietly. "Someone wants this vote delayed." Eliza's phone buzzed. Wallace's name flashed on the screen. She answered, already moving toward the exit. His voice came through sharp with urgency, background noise suggesting he was running. "Eliza, listen carefully. I just received word from one of Cyrus's contacts in the Mexican cartels. Pedro put out a contract 3 hours ago. Professional hitter, 6-figure payout. The target is Cyrus. Execution window is during the protest chaos when emergency services are overwhelmed." The world tilted. Eliza gripped the doorframe, her vision tunneling. Where is Cyrus now? The sanctum. He's coordinating response to the dock situation, trying to get our shipping operation secured before the violence spreads. Wallace's breathing was ragged, fear bleeding through his usually composed demeanor. Troy's security team is with him, but a professional assassin won't care about bodyguards. They'll wait for the perfect moment, when he's distracted, when the building's locked down, when nobody's expecting an attack. Eliza was already moving, pushing through the crowded hallway toward the parking garage. I'm 10 minutes away. Make it 5. Wallace disconnected. The drive to the sanctum was a blur of red lights ignored and traffic laws shattered. Eliza's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, her mind racing through scenarios each worse than the last. Pedro had planned this perfectly. Create chaos at the docks to delay the vote and overwhelm police response, then eliminate Cyrus during the confusion. With Cyrus dead, Eliza would lose her protection, her proxy authority would dissolve, and Pedro could reclaim control of the merger negotiations before the federal evidence ever saw a courtroom. 2 blocks from the sanctum, she hit gridlock. The protest had spread, angry crowds spilling into downtown streets, police barricades creating bottlenecks. She abandoned the car, running in heels that weren't designed for speed but carried her anyway through sheer desperate momentum. The sanctum rose ahead, its familiar facade now looking vulnerable in ways it never had before. The lunch crowd had evacuated, the ground floor eerily empty except for Troy's security team positioned at strategic points. They recognized her, waved her through to the private elevator. She burst into Cyrus's office to find him standing at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with someone about securing Davenport warehouses from the spreading violence. He turned at her entrance, surprise flickering across his features before shifting to concern at whatever expression she wore. He ended his call. What happened? There's a contract out on you. Eliza closed the distance between them, her hands finding his chest as if physical contact could somehow shield him from bullets. Pedro hired a professional. Wallace says the hit window is now, during the chaos, when emergency response is compromised. Cyrus's expression hardened into something cold and deadly, the predator recognizing a threat to his territory. He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer that revealed a handgun and additional ammunition. Troy and his team are already on high alert. We've locked down the building. No one in or out without biometric clearance. Every entrance is monitored. But even as he spoke, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died completely, plunging the office into dim emergency lighting powered by backup generators. Below them, the sanctum went dark. Cyrus moved immediately to the window. That's not the protest. That's deliberate. Someone cut the main power lines. The building's security system would still function on generators, but the disruption created exactly the kind of confusion a professional would exploit. Moment of distraction, systems resetting, attention divided. Eliza's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photograph loaded slowly in the compromised signal. Tarian's truck, the night he died. The image taken from an angle that showed Pedro's Mercedes in the background. Below it, a message, "Your turn, heiress. Should have stayed in your cage." She showed Cyrus, and watched his jaw tighten with barely controlled fury. He's here. Somewhere in this building or close enough to send that. Letting you know he's coming. Then we end this now, Cyrus said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a man who'd built an empire on being 3 moves ahead. He's making his play, but he's forgotten something crucial about chess. What's that? Cyrus checked his weapon, the motion practiced and efficient. The king is never the most dangerous piece on the board. The queen is. Before Eliza could respond, glass shattered somewhere below them, not the windows, but the distinctive sound of a door being breached. Troy's voice crackled over the security radio. urgent but controlled, reporting an intrusion on the second floor, shooter identified, team moving to intercept. The final move had begun. And somewhere in the darkness below, Pedro Mendez was gambling everything on one calculated strike that would either crown him king of Galveston or destroy him completely. Cyrus pulled Eliza close, his hand cradling the back of her head with fierce protectiveness. "Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, you stay behind me. Understand?" She nodded against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong despite the chaos, and understood that they'd reached the moment where everything would be decided: their alliance, their revenge, their survival, and whatever dangerous thing had grown between them in the shadows of sanctuary and shared grief. The war Pedro had started 6 months ago when he killed Tarion was about to reach its climax, and only one of them would walk away with a crown. The gunfire came from the 3rd floor, 3 sharp cracks that echoed through the sanctum's architecture like thunder trapped in a cave. Troy's voice crackled over the radio reporting the shooter pinned down near the east stairwell, but another breach detected on the service entrance, possible second assailant. Cyrus moved with practiced efficiency, positioning himself between Eliza and the office door, weapon drawn, every line of his body radiating lethal focus. But Eliza's mind was racing past the immediate danger toward the larger calculation, seeing the endgame with sudden brutal clarity. Pedro wasn't just trying to kill Cyrus. He was trying to break the sanctuary bond, eliminate the protection that had shielded her, reclaim the Davenport voting authority that had slipped through his fingers. Even if Cyrus survived tonight, Pedro would keep coming: more assassins, more legal battles, more attacks on her company until something gave way. The war would never end as long as the prize remained worth fighting for. Unless she removed the prize entirely. Wallace's briefcase sat on Cyrus's desk where he'd left it that morning, stuffed with legal documents for the Port Authority vote. Eliza moved toward it, her hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and pulled out the emergency corporate resolution forms Wallace always carried, the kind of paperwork that allowed for rapid response to crisis situations. "What are you doing?" Cyrus hadn't turned from his position by the door, but his awareness tracked her every movement. "Ending this." Eliza found a pen, began filling out the transfer documents with swift, decisive strokes. She was transferring her controlling shares in Davenport Seafood and Shipping, 51% of the company her family had built over 3 generations, directly to Cyrus St. John, effective immediately, irrevocable and permanent. More gunfire below. Shouting. The sound of bodies hitting walls. "Eliza, stop." Cyrus's voice carried warning, confusion, something that might have been fear. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." She signed her name with flourishes that matched her grandmother's signature on the original incorporation documents, then pulled out her phone, activating the video recording function. "For legal documentation," she stated clearly, showing the documents to the camera. "I, Eliza Marie Davenport, sole heir and controlling shareholder of Davenport Seafood and Shipping, do hereby transfer all voting rights, decision-making authority, and controlling interest to Cyrus James St. John, effective this date. This transfer is made of my own free will, without coercion, and is irrevocable under Texas corporate law." She ended the recording, uploaded it to the cloud, forwarded copies to Wallace, to the Port Authority, to her family's attorneys. Then she turned to face Cyrus, holding out the signed documents. "Take it. All of it. My company, my legacy, my family's entire future. It's yours now." Cyrus stared at her like she'd lost her mind, his weapon lowering slightly. "You're insane. That company is all you have left of your brother, your family. It's what Pedro wants." Eliza moved closer, pressing the documents into his hand. "He killed Tarion to control it, tried to marry me to own it, and now he's trying to kill you to steal it. But if I give it to you freely, completely, then there's nothing left for him to take. No merger to salvage, no voting authority to reclaim, no strategic advantage to murder for. The building shuddered as something exploded in the lower levels. Flash grenade or breaching charge, impossible to tell. Troy's radio chatter indicated they'd cornered one shooter but lost track of the second. "This is everything your family built," Cyrus said, but something had shifted in his voice, the cold tactical calculation fracturing into something raw. "Your great-grandfather's legacy. Your brother's inheritance. You're trusting me with all of it?" "Yes." The single word carried the weight of complete surrender, absolute trust, a leap of faith that defied every practical instinct for self-preservation. "Because you've never lied to me about what you wanted. You've protected me when you didn't have to. You've helped me seek justice when anyone else would have told me to let it go. And because—" Before she could complete her statement, the office door exploded inward. Not blown off its hinges, but kicked open with professional force. The man who entered was compact, efficient, wearing tactical gear that marked him as former military. His weapon swept the room in practiced arcs before settling on Cyrus. Behind him, Pedro Mendez appeared, his expensive suit disheveled from climbing service stairs, his expression twisted with rage and desperate triumph. He'd bypassed Troy's security team, used the chaos as cover, brought his hired killer directly to the source. "Step away from him, Eliza." Pedro's voice carried the command of someone accustomed to obedience. "This doesn't have to involve you. I'll even let you keep your sanctuary if you walk out now." But Eliza moved closer to Cyrus instead, her body deliberately positioning between him and the hitman's sight line. "Can't do that, Pedro. See, there's nothing left for you to take. I just gave it all away." She held up her phone, showing him the uploaded video, the corporate transfer documents. Davenport Seafood and Shipping now belongs entirely to Cyrus St. John. No merger, no marriage, no legal pathway for you to ever control my family's company. Everything you killed my brother for, it's gone. Pedro's face drained of color, the calculation in his eyes shifting to panic as he understood the magnitude of what she'd done. "You can't, that's not legal without board approval." "Actually, it is." Wallace appeared in the doorway behind Pedro, flanked by Troy's security team, weapons drawn. "Emergency corporate resolution, valid under Texas law during crisis situations. Already filed with the state, time-stamped, and notarized via digital signature. Miss Davenport's transfer is legally binding and irreversible." The hitman's weapon wavered, professional instinct recognizing a contract gone wrong, a target whose death no longer served its purpose. "It's over, Pedro." Cyrus's voice was granite wrapped in ice. "Your merger's dead. Your leverage is gone. And the federal evidence connecting you to Tarian's murder and cartel operations is already in the prosecutor's hands. You've got nothing left." Pedro made a desperate lunge toward Eliza, murder in his eyes, but Cyrus was faster. He caught Pedro's arm, twisted with brutal efficiency, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The hitman dropped his weapon, hands raised in professional surrender, recognizing when a contract had become a liability. Troy's team flooded the room, securing both Pedro and his hired killer with practiced speed. Wallace was already on the phone with federal agents, confirming their immediate arrival. But Eliza only had eyes for Cyrus, watching him process what she'd done, the complete trust, the absolute surrender of everything she'd fought to protect. His expression shifted through disbelief, understanding, and finally something that looked terrifyingly close to the emotion neither of them had dared name. He crossed to her, ignoring the chaos of arrests, and shouted Miranda rights, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence he'd just displayed. "You gave me everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Your company, your legacy, your family's entire future. Why?" "Because you do the same for me." Eliza's hands covered his, feeling the calluses that told stories of a life spent fighting for every inch of power. "Because we're stronger together than apart. And because somewhere between sanctuary and revenge, I stopped seeing you as a transaction and started seeing you as mine." The word was possession and promise and plea all wrapped into one. "You're mine, Eliza Davenport. Not because of contracts or corporate proxies, but because you chose me, trusted me, gave me the one thing I could never take by force." "Yours," she agreed, and felt his forehead touch hers, both of them breathing hard from adrenaline and relief and the overwhelming weight of having survived. Below them, federal agents poured into the sanctum. Pedro was dragged away in handcuffs, still shouting threats that rang hollow against the evidence that would bury him. The hitman went quietly, already negotiating his cooperation deal. The war was over. The evidence was secured. Justice for Tarian would finally be served. And Eliza had traded her crown for something infinitely more valuable, a partnership built on choice, trust forged in fire, and the dangerous, exhilarating freedom of loving someone who understood exactly what it cost to survive in a world that took everything and demanded more. The federal trial lasted 6 weeks, every day of testimony peeling back layers of corruption that had rotted Galveston's power structure from the inside out. Pedro Mendez sat in the defendant's chair wearing orange jumpsuit instead of designer suits, his expression shifting from arrogant defiance to hollow resignation as the evidence mounted. Tarian's sabotage truck, the security footage, Martin's testimony, the cartel connections, the money trails that led straight to murder and racketeering. Eliza testified on day 12, her voice steady as she recounted finding her brother's body, watching Pedro smile at the funeral, being forced toward a marriage designed to legitimize criminal empire. The jury had looked at her with sympathy that transformed into righteous anger when the prosecutors revealed the full scope of Pedro's plan: kill the heir, marry the sister, liquidate the legacy company, and transform century-old shipping routes into drug-running infrastructure. The guilty verdict came back in 4 hours. Murder in the first degree, racketeering, conspiracy, and money laundering. Sentencing guidelines suggested life without parole. Police Chief Dwight Kane fell 2 days later, arrested on corruption charges that connected him to 3 other covered-up murders and a decade of payoffs from the Mendez cartel. His resignation letter blamed stress and health issues, but everyone in Galveston knew the truth: the old guard had finally fallen. Eliza had expected the verdict to feel like closure, like justice served would somehow ease the Tarian-shaped hole in her chest. Instead, it just felt like the world confirming what she'd always known: her brother had been murdered, and no amount of courtroom vindication would bring him back. But standing beside Cyrus as the verdict was read, his hand finding hers beneath the gallery bench, she'd understood that grief didn't require closure. It required witness, acknowledgement, and someone willing to carry the weight alongside you. The Port Authority reformation happened swiftly once the corruption was exposed. Cyrus used his consolidated power, Davenport's legacy influence combined with his strategic control, to install new leadership, people with actual integrity instead of easily purchased loyalty. Environmental oversight, transparent contracting, regulatory enforcement that couldn't be bypassed with envelopes full of cash. Wallace took over as chief legal counsel, ensuring every decision could withstand federal scrutiny. The Davenport-St. John partnership became the talk of Galveston: old money legacy united with new power, tradition merged with transformation. Business journals wrote features. The society pages speculated. Port Authority meetings actually functioned as intended rather than serving as elaborate theaters for predetermined outcomes. But 6 months after the trial ended, Eliza and Cyrus made a choice that surprised everyone who thought they understood power. They stepped back. Not abandoned their responsibilities, but delegated them to people they trusted absolutely. Wallace handled legal operations. Cyrus managed security and investigation services. Troy oversaw the Sanctum's continued function as Galveston's neutral ground, though now operating entirely within legal boundaries. Trusted managers ran Davenport Seafood and Shipping's daily operations, preserving the company legacy while adapting to modern oversight. Eliza and Cyrus retreated to a restored beach house on the western edge of Galveston Island, a Victorian structure that had survived a century of hurricanes through stubborn endurance and deep foundations. They'd bought it together, renovated it together, filled it with furniture that belonged to neither family legacy, just two people building something entirely their own. The evening rituals became sacred. Watching the sunset paint the Gulf in shades of amber and rose. Walking barefoot through tide pools. Sharing stories about Tyrion and Devante, keeping their brothers alive through memory and laughter instead of just grief. Tonight, they stood at the water's edge as the sun sank toward the horizon, the sky bleeding from blue to gold to deep crimson. Cyrus's arm curved around Eliza's waist in that same possessive gesture from the night she'd claimed sanctuary, but transformed now into tenderness, chosen connection, the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd survived war together and decided peace was worth more than empire. "You ever regret it?" Cyrus asked, his chin resting on top of her head. "Giving away your company. Walking away from the power." Eliza leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her spine. "Not even once. I spent my whole life preparing to inherit a legacy, and it took losing everything to realize I never wanted that crown. I just wanted the freedom to choose my own path." His arms tightened around her. "And you chose me. I chose us." She turned in his embrace, her hands finding the sides of his face, tracing the strong lines that had once seemed so intimidating and now just felt like home. "We built something better than what we inherited, Cyrus. No corruption, no obligation, no crowns we didn't choose. Just two people who understand what it costs to survive and decided to build something worth surviving for." He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promises they no longer needed words to express. The waves crashed against the shore. The sun completed its descent. The city lights began to flicker on in the distance, Galveston continuing its eternal cycle of darkness and illumination. They'd been heirs and victims, players and pawns, survivors and warriors. But here, in this stolen moment of peace they'd earned through blood and trust and the terrifying courage of choosing love over legacy, they were just Eliza and Cyrus. Two people who'd found each other in sanctuary and built a kingdom out of choice instead of obligation. And that, they both agreed as they walked back toward their house hand in hand, was worth more than any empire. If you can't stand people like Pedro Mendez, murderers who hide behind wealth and corruption, who destroy families for profit and think they're untouchable, then hit that subscribe button right now. Only people who side with bullies, manipulators, and killers who use power to escape justice would scroll past this story. Don't be like them. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you believe murderers should face consequences no matter how rich or connected they are. And if you think people like Pedro, who killed Tyrion just to steal a company, deserve to rot in prison, let me know you're on the right side by smashing that like button. Don't side with the villains. Be like Eliza and Cyrus. Fight for what's right, no matter the cost.